Hello and welcome. I'm Alexandra. I'm a full-time food blogger, cookbook author, food photographer, etc. And I thought it might be interesting to look at what a day at work looks like for a food blogger who doesn't use AI for writing, spell check, God forbid, for generating pictures. So I just thought it might be interesting to see what it actually looks like to work on all these recipes, and then what a day of work looks like when, you don't use AI. I don't have any help other than my partner. And so what does that mean to actually run a food blog? Today I'm doing pictures for occasionally eggs, and then once a week I do all the pictures for the Bake Collective, which is a collective website that I'm in. So it'll depend on what I'm doing on that day. But yeah, so I'm almost at the end of my workday now. It's just after 3:30. I only have 2 more recipes, but that's probably going to be another 3 hours or so in the kitchen. And then I have to edit this evening. But let's rewind, go back to this morning when I started, and I'll walk you through the day. And also, if you are interested in, seasonal cooking, baking, ancient grains, then I'll also be giving a bunch of different tips and tricks and information through the day about the actual recipes that I'm making. So you might also find that interesting if you're into the kinds of recipes that I share. I just got up about half an hour ago, maybe you can tell. But last night I mixed up this sourdough waffle batter, and so instead of making something different for breakfast, I'm just going to finish this up and then eat that for breakfast. Because sometimes when I'm shooting, we end up with way too much food, and sometimes I'll share it, like I have a group chat that I'll send out messages to and say we have this and this and this, whoever wants it can come pick it up. But like yesterday I made curry, stew, burger buns, burgers, chocolate, and so we have a bunch of food in the fridge, and I mean it'll last a few days, so that'll just take us through the next few days. But then instead of making a separate meal for this, if I've already mixed up this waffle batter, then I might as well just have that for breakfast, right? So I'm gonna do that quickly now before I start anything else. And I've left it here set up anyway. I just need to put my camera on the tripod. So it's quick, right? Instead of starting something from scratch, this has already been mixed. So I can do this for breakfast and maybe have something to drink so that I don't sound like this anymore, and then keep going. I have my hand on the shutter here because I want to get the picture very quickly before the maple syrup soaks into the waffles. But I got some maple syrup on my fork. Whoops. And now this breakfast isn't as healthy as it otherwise would be if I didn't soak it in maple syrup, but it'll taste good. My fish plate. So this is the most popular recipe on my site, and it has been for years, spelt bread. And so it does really well, but I just think that it could be a little bit better, more useful information. It doesn't currently have step-by-step pictures. It doesn't have an ingredient photo. So I'm taking a bit of a risk because I want to update it to have those things, but there's a chance that then it won't show up anymore in Google. So I don't know, we'll see. But I think that it'll be so much better as a post, as a recipe, if it does include this extra information. I have done a couple different videos for it, like a long form video years ago when we still lived in Holland, and then another short form video this past autumn, I think, maybe it was in the summer, just to kind of show how you actually make it more effectively. But I don't know, we'll see. It's such an old recipe actually that I first did it when we still lived in Canada. So it uses sprouted spelt flour, which I've never seen here to buy. But then, so I've tested it. I mean, I've made it so many times, so I've tested it with sprouted, whole, and light spelt flour. So now I'm gonna make it with a mix of light and whole grain spelt for this round of pictures. This is a slightly enriched bread because it's more like a sandwich bread. So it's made with milk and a little bit of olive oil. A sort of standard loaf of bread, as you probably know, is made with just flour, water, salt, and yeast. But this makes it a bit softer, maybe slightly more delicate in the crumb, not in that it falls apart, but that it's just softer and a more pleasant bite. And then the crust is also a bit softer. Yeah. And like I said, I've made this, dozens, potentially hundreds of times, because it's been sort of our standard bread recipe for so many years. And so it's what I always make when we just need a loaf of bread. The first thing I'm going to do here is bloom my yeast in a bit of warm water with honey mixed into it. And because this is such an old recipe, I find the measurements slightly annoying because it uses the equivalent of a quarter cup in the first blooming stage for the yeast. But I mean, it's fine. 60 milliliters of water is 60 grams of water. So you just measure it out on your scale. This is fresh yeast, which is my personal preference. And it doesn't actually need to be bloomed. You just mix it in with the wet ingredients and then continue. But I'm showing the step of it blooming because a lot of people will be using traditional dry yeast, especially North Americans. And so I want to show what that bubbling looks like when it is ready, when it's bloomed. So while that's blooming, I'm going to get my ingredients together for olive oil granola, which is the thing that I'm going to be making while this bread is rising, mixing, and so on. So I did already today panna cotta beauty and a waffle beauty shot. Oops. And now I need to actually start making stuff for process shots. I have a couple new recipes that I'm shooting today too. Like I'm making einkorn dinner rolls, which isn't really new. I feel like I have to look again. I know I tested 2 types of this dinner roll recipe. One is for an upcoming book and then another one is for the site. I think the one that I'm doing for the book isn't einkorn. I think it might be emmer, but I have to check again. But one is in my notebook and one is on my computer, so I know which one is for the site and which one is for the book. The yeast has bloomed enough to take a picture of. It hasn't been 15 minutes, but it's enough to clearly show that it's bloomed, and so that's fine for this.
So how do you know it looks bloomed?
Well, with fresh yeast it looks a little bit different, but it's expanded, it's bubbled up. You can see that there are these little bubbles in it. If I were to leave it longer, it would completely fill the surface of the water and it would be really visibly yeasty. With dry yeast, it will also do that. And that's kind of what you're looking for with dry yeast. But pretty much, if you see activity, if you see clear activity that your yeast is bubbling up, then it's fine to use. You do this, one, because traditional yeast has a hard outer shell on it, and so you need to dissolve that in order for the yeast to activate, and also to show that your yeast is still active. A lot of people store their yeast incorrectly, and then it's dead before they can actually use it to make bread. If you store your yeast like above your stove top, for example, or in a warm place, it's going to kill it. And so it's best to always just test it like this beforehand so that you're not mixing it in with all of your ingredients and then it doesn't rise and then you've wasted all of that stuff, all of the food, and all of that money that's gone into the ingredients. So it's just good practice, I think. And the only time you don't need to do this is when you're using instant yeast. But I will say that in Europe, like everywhere that I've lived in Europe, there's no differentiation. There's no labeling difference on the yeast types that you get. Like dry yeast is just dry yeast. And so I bloom it every time, no matter what. In North America, you do have that where you have instant, traditional, active, and so on. And so I haven't actually weighed the amount of flour in this bowl, so now I'm just checking it with the scale under here. I need to start with 300 grams, and that was only 200. I'm doing about half whole grain and half light spelt or sifted. So in Germany, this type 630 is light or sifted spelt, and then the other one is Vollkorn, whole grain. So I often get comments from people saying, I made this recipe, but I reduced the salt, or I added more salt, and it didn't turn out the way that the pictures do. You don't mess around with the amount of salt in a bread recipe. It is integral to the productivity of the yeast. The amount of salt is directly related to the yeast, and it helps your dough rise. And if you change the amount of salt, then you're going to run into problems, and that's that. And I think that people often forget that baking is really a science, and you need to keep the amounts correct. And changes that you make, like changing the amount of salt, using a different type of flour, changing the sugar, often reducing the sugar, and then thinking, oh no, why did this turn out dry? Why didn't my cookie spread as much? And so on. These are changes that make a big impact on what you're baking. So I know for some people, they want to reduce the salt because they need to watch their sodium intake. But in that case, then I would recommend seeking out a recipe that's been specifically developed with that in mind instead of trying to adapt a recipe at home, because you'll get better results that way. Okay, so now we've got a shaggy dough. So this is something that I also, because this recipe was originally developed with cups, because I was thinking, oh, North American audience, I need to use cups instead of grams. And now I've kind of given up on that. It says to add the flour bit by bit until you get it to the desired consistency. You don't need, the thing is, you kind of don't really need to do that if you're using grams. It does depend a little bit. I do find that using Canadian grown flour, that I do generally need less than using German, Swedish, French flour, because it's just higher in protein. So the gluten strength is stronger, even with something like spelt, just because of the differences in soil structure. So it's not necessarily a bad idea, but that being said, when I make this, when I'm in Germany, Sweden, France, Holland, I use 500 grams of spelt flour, and I don't add it bit by bit as I'm kneading because I don't need to. And the more that you make a recipe, the more used to it you'll get. And this isn't like, you know, this brand of flour works with this much. It really comes down to where is this grain grown. And North American grain flour is simply stronger than anything that you're gonna get that's grown in Europe. And that's just a difference in soil quality. Not only soil quality, but also, you know, we're talking about the other environmental elements, like a lot of wheat is grown in the prairies where I'm from in Canada, and it gets really hot there in the summer, and also the soil is really rich. You know, these are elements that make a difference when you're talking about your flour protein content. And so a lot of bakers will know Manitoba flour, and that's a type of flour, but it's named after the province that I'm from, where some of the strongest wheat in the world is grown. This is a granola recipe, my personal favorite granola recipe, but yeah, it doesn't show up very well online, so I'm reshooting it with ingredient shots and stuff like that, process, etc. This was during my sumac phase, So this granola originally has sumac in it. I don't currently have any, so I'm just using some vanilla extract instead. And then I'll write, when I update the post, I'll write all this extra information and I'll say you can use sumac, you can use cinnamon, you can use nutmeg, you could use like a chai mix, anything, whatever. It's a very neutral granola. And I've had some people actually call this a savory granola, which I don't really agree with because there is maple syrup in it and there is vanilla in it and so on. And also, I personally don't like a very sweet granola, so this is my vanilla, by the way. This is not a bottle of vodka. It is, in fact, vanilla extract. It's hard to photograph, and it's also hard to film in non-transparent bowls, so in ceramic bowls, whatever. And I usually would prefer to use a nice big glass bowl. I have one in our storage unit, but I have no idea where it is. And then also at my aunt's place where we often stay when we're here. And then we're in Germany right now. And I shoot pretty often when we're there. And she has a million dishes. But we're at a friend's place now, house sitting, and she's got lots of lovely kitchen things, but no glass mixing bowls. So I'm using ceramic bowls, and it's just, I mean, like obviously it's fine, but with a glass bowl, your light goes through the glass, so it illuminates everything that's inside it more effectively. And then with a ceramic bowl, you're just not seeing what's inside of it as clearly. Yeah. It's not actually a big problem. It's just something that I think about a lot. That, oh, I wish I had my mixing bowl. And my big glass mixing bowl is actually, it's very much like this one. And I always have people asking me where I've gotten it from. And I got it from IKEA years ago. And I saw yesterday that they still sell it on the US IKEA site, but they don't sell it in Germany anymore. Because this granola has chia seeds in it, you really need to get it mixed quickly as soon as you add the liquids, or else the chia will just clump. It'll find those liquids and it'll just clump. I really like this combination, but it's definitely not, it's a more mature feeling granola, I think, because it's got olive oil, maple syrup, seeds. It's not very sweet, but something that's good, you know, if you're not such a sweet, how do you say this? If you don't have such a big sweet tooth, but you still like granola, then I think that this is a good option. Or if you're just trying not to eat so much sugar. I mean, so many granola recipes, they're so full of sugar, and I don't know. I don't want that for breakfast. It just makes me tired. And so then this way, you can have it on plain yogurt or sweetened yogurt, or you can add some extra honey or fruit or whatever you want in the morning. And then you're not like sluggish for the rest of the morning because you've just eaten, you know, a chocolate bar for breakfast or something. Not that I didn't just eat a bunch of waffles with maple syrup for breakfast. I always feel like a bit of a fraud with breakfast recipes because we eat almost exactly the same thing for breakfast every day, except when it's very hot out. So maybe in July and August we don't do this, then we'll maybe have yogurt, but every other day of the year, pretty much, we eat apple porridge with berries mixed in and then peanut butter on top. And that's every day, and Graham gets up and he makes that for us every morning for breakfast. And so then anytime I'm making another breakfast recipe, I'm like, oh, this is so great, I love having this for breakfast. And I mean, I would like to, but mostly it's just a lie because it's like an imaginary thing because we just eat the same oatmeal every day. Okay. So I just let this dough hydrate a bit, and now it's gonna finish kneading. Spelt dough needs less time kneading than white flour dough, than regular, you know, all-purpose or bread flour. So, but good practice is anytime you're doing something with whole grains, if you find that it's tearing a bit or not coming together when it's kneading, then just let it relax for a few minutes and come back to it. And then the grains will have hydrated more effectively, and then it'll come together much more easily. So that's what I just did.
has risen, it has doubled in size, and now it's ready to shape. That's all there is to say.
I've just padded it out now to a rectangle. That's the width, short end of my tin. So I think I outlined this in the post, or I will when I rewrite it for sure, that you don't necessarily need to do this, but it just makes the dough tidier. It makes your loaf look nicer. It makes it slice more easily. These are all good things. It is worth noting that spelt dough is a bit floppier than white flour dough. So you might notice that if you're not used to working with spelt, that it'll just look a little bit different. It'll act a little bit different. It'll be more prone to tearing and so on. So I'm just taking it and I'm gonna tuck these ends under. So I've got a nice little clean loaf here. Yeah, and it's pretty soft, especially because it's quite warm in here. So I'm going to just gently press it into the tin to level it out a bit, because otherwise I maybe would get it higher on the ends or something like that, and I want it to be pretty straight across the whole way. But you can see also, it's not sticky at all. It's proved properly. I've got a couple little folds here, but they'll incorporate into the dough as it rises. So, one thing about this, I took my camera in once to get the lens cleaned, and the guy at the camera repair shop was like, "What have you been doing?" Because my camera is always covered in flour because I have to touch it while I'm touching things with flour on it and stuff. So my camera is always unfortunately filthy. This is kind of a neat thing, that the spices from Sonnentor, this isn't plastic, it's like a corn, or I don't know exactly what it's made out of, but it's compostable. We get all of our spices from Sonnentor because they use compostable plastic in their packaging. That being said though, this one doesn't actually say that it is compostable plastic. In my opinion, there is no point in buying pre-ground nutmeg. It should always be whole, and then that you grind it yourself when you're about to use it. And if you think that you don't like nutmeg, try it fresh and grind it yourself, because I bet you will like it, because it tastes completely different from the pre-ground stuff. This is carrot cake overnight oats. So the carrots get stirred in after, kind of like, well, like carrot cake, where you have your batter mixed and then you add grated carrots, right? But I am, with anything like this, I'm always a bit worried that people aren't going to like those extra steps or that extra little bit of effort that it needs, and then no one will make it. But then also sometimes I am really surprised by the amount of effort that people will put in to cooking. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I don't know what people want at all, and it's just a total shot in the dark. But I've been making a lot of baked oats lately, and we've been really liking them. So I don't know. I hope that other people will like them too. We'll find out. I guess this is something that I'll talk about when I'm writing up these recipes, but I gotta say, I think that it makes a huge difference to mix the batter for the baked oats with an immersion blender versus in the standing mixer, because that is such a hassle to clean out, and it just goes poof and explodes everywhere and then doesn't actually mix properly. do when I'm making sandwich breads or anything sweet like cinnamon rolls or something like that as well, I'll brush the top with a bit of oil or dairy-free butter when it comes out, because, well, it softens it, which is always nice. But this is also because it just looks way better. And unfortunately, sometimes I do feel like I need to do things that are just for looks. But you know, the thing is, maybe that's not just something that we do as food photographers, right? Maybe that's also just something that is nice to do because it's nice when food looks nice. I don't know. It feels really shallow sometimes, but also I don't think it's unreasonable to want your food to look attractive, to look delicious before you actually taste it, right? And maybe I wouldn't do this if there was no other practical purpose to it. But because it also makes it taste nicer, it makes the texture a bit better and so on, then I think that it's well worth it. So spelt bread is done. I'm gonna mix up einkorn dinner rolls now. I have some milk heating up on the stove here. And then that might be my last recipe of the day. It's only 3 o'clock though, so I probably am going to do rice pudding still. That's another reshoot because I have some fresh strawberries, which are very, very out of season, so I don't want to waste them. Well, we wouldn't waste them, we would just eat them, but I would like to use them in something for work. And then after that, then I'll be done for the day. After kneading, and it is nice and soft now. It's not sticking to my finger. It is soft, smooth, but not tacky. So that had about 15 minutes of resting time or hydration time while it was in the mixer, so not kneading, actively kneading only for about 6 minutes, and then resting in total for about 15 minutes in 2 periods. So I let it rest, I kneaded for a couple minutes, let it rest again, kneaded again for a few minutes, let it rest again, and then kneaded again for about a minute. So, well, actually I guess a bit more than 15 minutes in total hydration time, because it hydrates before you knead it and then again as needed while kneading. And so I think that this is a really good tip to consider when doing any whole grain recipes, particularly ancient grain recipes. They will need time to hydrate. So if you're finding that your dough is it's breaking more than it's coming together, then you need to give it time to rest so that those whole grains can hydrate effectively, and then your dough will come together really, really nicely. So of course I'll write all of this in the post, but it's also something just to keep in mind in general when you're baking with whole grain ancient grains. This is how to properly shape the bun. Take your dough piece, bring it all the way in from the outside so that you get a fairly tight ball already. So that's all gathered in the middle. This is what the top currently looks like. Put a little flour on the top, and then make a cage with your fingers and roll, 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 and then do a little like you would for sourdough. And there you've got a perfect little ball. That's your bun. That creates surface tension, so you get a better, more even rise on your bun, and then stays round. You have to make sure that your countertop, where you're rolling on though, is relatively free from flour. It needs to stick a little bit. You want the top to be not sticky, that's why you add that little bit of flour, but the bottom needs to be a little bit sticky so that it sticks to the counter as you're working. Of course, there are other methods of doing this, like rolling the dough. This is my personal preference, and this is just how I've always shaped buns. I find it so much faster, but it just depends on what you like doing, really. What's fastest and most effective for you. So now these need to rise covered until they're about doubled in size, so 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on the temperature.
done for the day. The kitchen looks not bad because Graham has already cleaned it twice and is now on the third cleaning. It is 7:30. 7:30, so I've been working for 12 hours. I haven't done any editing yet, that's just shooting. And I guess I probably took about an hour break. We did a 20-minute walk, and I'd say I probably did 20 minutes for lunch and dinner. I didn't lie on the floor at all today, which I usually take a floor break, but I don't know. I guess I got enough sleep last night, and I got everything done on my list, so I'm pretty happy with how the day went. But I am also really tired now.